What is a labor shed? Where do businesses get their workers? How widespread is a labor shed? Understanding a labor shed is important for economic development planners because they need to know the supply of workers that are able to work in their region. They also need to know their competition with neighboring communities. So understanding a particular community's labor shed is very important to understanding the potential for a community to grow. Our labor forces are very dynamic. We commute to jobs. Now, we may commute from within a county to a town, or we may commute from one town to another, or from a suburb to a central city. Our labor forces are also complicated by the fact that many of us hold more than one job. We may work here in one job, and we may work there in another job. Households are also an important consideration when we think about our labor force, because it is very likely that we have more than one earner in a household. And because we have more than one earner in a household, again, where those persons might work might differ. We have to deal with the overall economic conditions with regard to our labor force and the supply of labor. We know, of course, that we have to deal with unemployment. If we've gone through a recession, or if you're in an area that's declining or has suffered disproportionately from plant closings, you may have high unemployment. Over time, high unemployment is going to lead to out-migration. We may also have in an area underemployment. There's just not enough good jobs relative to the demand for good jobs in an area. And then lastly, and very importantly, we need to pay attention to the pace, pattern, and the quality of job creation. All of these things link together and help us understand both the size, the structure, and the overall dynamics of change in a labor force. So our key labor considerations begin with: where do people live? Where do people work? It's very important, and we pay attention to this. How do people get to work? Here in the Midwest, most people get to work by car. Some people use public transit. And then we have something else that's very important, and that is the natural tension between different communities relative to a common supply of labor. There is a tension between community A and community B, and the probability of living and working in community A, or living in community A, let's say, and working in community B. We help to explain this by thinking in terms of gravity. Gravity in and of itself has something to do with the mass of two entities in space. So for any region, in and out commuting is going to depend on the size of your local economy relative to the size of your neighboring economies. We are in competition with our surrounding economies for workers. So we use gravity. It's a mathematical model that two bodies are going to have an attraction to one another based on the product of their size, their mass, and the distance they are from one another. And so when we think of the gravity of an urban area, like a major metropolitan area, it would be relatively strong on a surrounding rural economy. Let's take a look at how gravity plays a part in the labor supply that's able to work in Polk County, Iowa. Polk County is the home of Des Moines, Iowa, the largest city in the state of Iowa. What this graph shows is the number of in-commuters coming from nearby counties. And these nearby counties are measured in terms of their miles from the center of Polk County. Now, I've excluded Polk County here. What I want to capture are the miles, average miles driven by the workers and the number of workers coming in. So we can see that from nearby counties, the average number of workers coming in is 12,000 to about 13,000 from two counties whose average distance from the center of Polk County is 15 miles. You can see then the number of workers that are supplied from the counties that are farther out, those whose average distance is roughly 35 or so miles from Polk County, the supply of workers coming in is much lower. As we move out to another ring of counties, we can see that the numbers go down, and the farther out we move, the lower the number of workers, the raw number of workers or in-commuters that are coming into Polk County. Now we can look at this a different way. We can look at the percentage of the labor force that's working in Polk County by county in which the workers live. So way up over here in the corner, we can see that about 95% of the people who live in Polk County also work in Polk County. When we go out to that next group of communities, those that were 15 miles or so out, we can see that between 55 and close to 60% of the people who live in those counties who have jobs are working in the neighboring county, in Polk County. Or to state it a different way, more of their workers work in the neighboring county than in the hosting county. We can see as we move farther out that the probability of working in Polk County goes down. There's something of a spread in this next ring of counties out, but as we move farther out, this pattern tends to consolidate. Well, we can model this. We can draw lines that approximate the likelihood of workers coming in here from a distance away. And we can write that into an equation and make it part of how we might want to estimate an area's labor force. Or we could do this where we estimate the probability of your labor force working in a nearby central city. And in this case, this was Polk County, and I've excluded again Polk County because that was very high. But what we wanted to know was what might be the average probability by distance. At about 10 miles, it's about 65%. At about 15 or so miles, it was what the average was of those two counties, about 55 to 60%. And we have a nice curve, and it decreases quite sharply as the distance from the larger economy goes up. Well, this probability of working in a neighboring county, especially an urban one, holds across the state of Iowa, whether we're dealing with another large metropolitan area or if we're dealing with a regional trade center. We're going to look at a typical rural area labor shed. I'm going to highlight Jefferson, Iowa. Jefferson, Iowa is in Greene County, Iowa, and it's in the close to the center of the state. I'm looking at on the map. It's an option under the Census Bureau's website up here, www.census.gov, and you can get to the on the map portion of it to start to analyze a region's labor shed. We're looking at Greene County, Iowa here, and what we need to do here is interpret this information that's in front of us so that we understand what's going on in Greene County with regard to their labor force, and in particular what's going on in the major city, the city of Jefferson. This center number says that there are 796 people with payroll jobs who both live in Jefferson and work in Jefferson. The arrow coming in from the left says that in Jefferson there are 1,270 persons with payroll jobs who do not live in Jefferson but depend on Jefferson as their place of employment. On the right-hand side, we see the arrow moving to the right or to the east, and that says that there are 1,128 people who live in Jefferson but do not work in Jefferson. So over to the right on this display, we can start to understand the characteristics of employment in the city of Jefferson in Greene County, Iowa. First off, there are 2,066 payroll jobs in Jefferson. 1,270 of those payroll jobs are filled by people from outside of the city of Jefferson. 796 are filled by people from inside the city of Jefferson. So you can see that the city of Jefferson is very dependent on its external labor force. Most of the labor that the city of Jefferson requires for all of its enterprises comes from outside of the city. Now we're going to look at a different dimension. there were 1,924 Jefferson City residents who had a job somewhere in the universe. Of that 1,924, 1,128 worked someplace else beside the city of Jefferson. It might have been just another town in the county, or it might have been a nearby trade area. To the west is Carroll, to the north is Fort Dodge, to the east is Boone, farther to the east is Ames, a metropolitan area, and to the south and east is the Des Moines metropolitan area. And again, as we've already noted, there were 796 people who both lived and worked in Jefferson. So what I have are two very important probabilities. If there is a job in Jefferson, historically, there's only about a 38.5% chance that job is filled by a local. If somebody in Jefferson has a job someplace in the universe, almost 59% of those people live in Jefferson, but they work someplace else. Well, these competing dynamics in our labor force make it very, very hard to predict what might happen if I add jobs to my region. Let's say that Jefferson was able to add a small manufacturing firm. How might those jobs be filled? Let's assume that we're adding 100 jobs in the city of Jefferson. Who can fill those jobs? Well, the first way we can fill them, at least some of them, hopefully, is that people who are currently unemployed would be able to take one of those jobs. The next category of person likely to fill a local job would be an existing out commuter. If you have the choice between out commuting and staying home to work, and either your commuting time goes down or your income goes up, you're going to choose to work closer to home. If the jobs are any good, you might attract some new in-commuters from outside of the city of Jefferson and from outside the county of Greene. There's always people who are entering the workforce. They either enter the workforce because they've now come of age and are part of the workforce, or they re-enter the workforce because there are opportunities there to work that weren't there before. And then finally, the last way you can fill that job is from in-migrants. And an in-migrant, somebody who comes to live in Jefferson and to work in Jefferson. But I caution you to remember that even though we added 100 jobs, only one of these 5 ways in which the jobs can be filled involves a new person moving to the community of Jefferson.